Cierra Ortega barely finished her breakfast before the Love Island USA production pulled her and dumped her from the villa for her anti-Asian racist rhetoric that was found on her very carefully managed social media. Love Island moves fast, but the American internet moves faster, and that is in part due to the fact that last year's season 6 had a runaway success. So this year, from the jump, we had people looking at these contestants and watching the show very early on. Now, some might say this is a win against a particular form of anti-Asian hate that other communities have started to be more aware of since 2020. But we have to remember, Cierra was not pulled from Love Island because of her racist rhetoric, ultimately. And that brings up the question about why it matters that a game show, reality TV, and a game show contestant should be held responsible for the language that they use. With the world burning, why does that matter? Cierra wanted to be on the show for years. There's no crime in that. 3 years ago, she threw a Love Island birthday party, and when she came on as a bombshell, she was happy and she was ready to win. She was totally seeming to enjoy the process. She carefully played this game to a T, eliminating her friends' more threatening connections, and also waiting until the midpoint to lock down Nick and give a more realistic, reasonable story for a connection. By doing this at the midpoint of the series, she avoided looking like a villain for axing her friends' connections and in settling down with Nick, right? Because the public, who ultimately gets to vote on their most favorite couple at the end of it and decides the winning couple, they're not going to believe a connection that locks in too quickly. When she had to choose between the much higher ranked TJ and Iris to keep them together, as opposed to Taylor and Clark, who were the least voted amongst the American people, she picked TJ and Iris. You think it was accidental to send a higher ranking couple home as opposed to a lower ranking couple? No. Originally, it was Ace who's considered the more obvious strategist. But eagle-eyed audiences have watched Cierra and who she talks to and where she sits as she is aware of the way people rise and fall among the American voting system for the villa. Your popularity in the villa, of course it matters, but you can't win without the American people crowning you. And everybody wanted to be the people's princess of this season. Cierra was one of the many people who was shocked that the often dismissed and bullied Amaya was actually the most favorite, that she had been crowned America's sweetheart. Cierra has maintained some goodwill in the last couple weeks, but that plummeted when people realized that she had used an anti-Asian slur to describe her eyes, her looks, and a cosmetic procedure that she was getting to correct for that. She didn't say correct, it was heavily implied. The first time was in 2015, and then the more famous one is when she was talking about that cosmetic work she was doing that affected her eyes. And you guys already know this, we live in a society. Whether you're in the villa or outside the villa, we are all existing in a social context. That social context openly ranks women according to a white supremacist beauty metric. We take that metric and we say, oh, it's just our type. It's just a preference. A good sector of Asian Americans in this country have long been held up and weaponized to bludgeon other immigrants or the descendants of enslaved people or African American communities that were historically and continually economically and physically oppressed. The model minority myth not only obscures the historical violence, economic oppression, and attacks that various Asian American communities have faced over the years. It obscures an ongoing current poverty issue that has happened due to racist policies and anti-immigration policies that tend to affect as well Asian Americans. What does it also hide? Oh, the fact that Asian American women are continually fetishized, stereotyped, and abused through socially accepted sexual scripts that are still being passed down by American men. It ignores the way we have normalized the violence that occurred against Vietnamese and Korean people by American soldiers. For all the progress that white supremacy gave Asian American communities at the expense of African Americans, there are still people that are disposable. Disposable by people who still hold on to racist fears and ideas that are kept alive by the language we use. Language that demeans or dehumanizes a particular group of people, especially by using physical characteristics, is language that creates a context in which more harm can happen. Asian American women are not targeted with sexual violence or physical violence on a whim. That happens because we are in a culture that has decided that they are less than. When Cierra used that slur to describe even her own self and her eyes, it was unequivocally anti-Asian. It is not anyone else's place but Asian Americans to determine if a slur about their physical features or their genetic history and lineage is offensive. especially when it is a particular old slur with a long history. This is not the time to say, well, I don't feel any type of way about it, so I can brush it under the rug for you. Let us be aware that this controversy brewed for several days, and it was you who ultimately said this is the kind of language that needs to be addressed and dealt with, and we can't just go on as usual. Production has not magically figured out a way to represent Asians, protect Asians, or Black people on this show, because they didn't dig very deep when they were casting people. How do you think easily discoverable Andrew Tate followers and MAGA people were able to get on this show in the first place? This show yanks people when it's time to protect brand image and the brands who have products on this show. They got to protect the people who keep all those neon lights on. Brands don't want any discussion of anti-Asian rhetoric around their product placement. An internal source, allegedly to the US Sun, talked about how the production crew was furious. The individual people working on the show were really disappointed. They said, behavior is unacceptable, crew's unhappy, we have to have a crisis meeting about this. Pulling her from the show was not immediately the first thing they thought of doing. And we, the American diverse people, we've got to protect ourselves. We have to remember that division amongst people of color does not equal community strength or cohesion for our own groups. We are most weak and vulnerable to white supremacy when we forget that interlocking forms of white supremacy form a hierarchy that we shouldn't be trying to rank ourselves on, but we should be trying to abolish altogether. No one is going to say that the sexual violence and the economic violence and the physical violence has the same origin points or the same story and everyone's experience is the same. That's just not true. But the justification for the racism we all face, it has a common root. This racist justification that our bodies are something to be ashamed of, that our bodies are made in such a way that they don't warrant respect. We can remain kind and firm and call each other into a safer, better, more inclusive community. Because it doesn't matter how long certain slurs or vocabulary has been normalized or been around in our communities. Dump it.